as I said, our guest speaker for tonight is Professor Greg Barton. He is the Herb Feith Research Professor for the Study of Indonesia in the Faculty of Arts at Monash University, based in the Politics program in the School of Political and Social Inquiry. He is Acting Director of the Center of Islam and Modern World, Deputy UNESCO Chair in Interreligious and Intercultural Relations, Asia Pacific, and Deputy Head of the School of Political and Social Inquiry International. In 2011, he became the co-editor of the journal Islam and Christian-Muslim Relations. Professor Barton has been active for the past 20 years in interfaith dialogue initiatives and has a deep commitment to building understanding of Islam and Muslim society. He also has a strong general interest in comparative international politics. He's also great general interest in security studies and particular interest in counterterrorism. He is an active member of the Global Terrorism Research Center at Monash and is involved in teaching several counterterrorism courses at Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu and other institutions and agencies. Together with the director of the Global Terrorism Research Center, he is leading a large ARC linkage research project examining violent extremist radicalization and counter-radicalization. Professor Greg has written or edited 6 books and published dozens of articles and book chapters, together with numerous essays. He is currently working on 2 other book projects: Progressive Islamic Thought and Social Movements in Indonesia and Turkey, and Islam's Other Nation, Faith in Democratic Indonesia. I now give you Professor Greg Barton.
Assalamu alaikum. It's good to see you, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you tonight. I want to speak to you from my own personal position, since it may be helpful to understand my experience and my position, both individually and academically, because we are dealing with a challenging topic tonight that, as you know, is always in the media and often not very clear and often loaded with lots of misunderstanding and concern. So if I speak from my own experience and position, inshallah, hopefully it will be some benefit, and at least it can provoke thought and help us to think through some of the issues. I don't pretend to have answers to very complex and challenging questions, and I acknowledge we live in a world today that faces many, many difficulties and a lot of injustice and a lot of suffering. And it's understandable people are very moved by all of this and concerned to do something about it, which is a good thing, since I believe we are required to give an account for our lives at the end of our lives. And on the day of judgment, we will have to explain what we have done, not just for ourselves and our family, but for the entirety of society. So I'll talk a little bit, first of all, about my general interest academically in Islam. And then I'll talk a little bit about how my perspective as an individual is shaped by my own personal faith position coming from a Christian tradition. And then I'll speak about recent work that I've been involved with, trying to understand why some people, mostly young people and mostly young men, get drawn to political movements. I can understand the anger and the concern for the bad things that are happening in this world and the desire to do something. But one of the challenges we face is why our young people end up being drawn into political movements that lead harm to themselves and harm to others. And I'll give you my perspective on that. As I said, I don't pretend to have simple answers to these very challenging issues. But I hope that speaking from my heart, it can be some benefit, inshallah. So first of all, my academic background. As you heard in the introduction, I teach at Monash University. The school has changed its name. It's now the School of Social Science. And I teach in the international politics program, politics and international relations. So trying to understand world affairs. And I particularly teach, and I have taught for many years, the politics in the Muslim world, that's to say in Muslim majority nations across the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. My particular expertise is in Southeast Asia, although I've had a long interest in Turkey as well. And I began my academic work, my PhD, by looking at Islamic thought in Indonesia. And the people that I looked at 25 years ago in Indonesia as Islamic leaders made a great contribution to Indonesia's development. Alhamdulillah, the last 15 years, Indonesia has enjoyed very good development in a world that's very troubled. It has political stability. There have been 4 elections since President Suharto stepped down in May of '98 in the middle of a financial crisis. And those elections have been peaceful and have gone well. There were elections this year in April for the legislature, the parliament, and in July for the president. And I do believe, looking at the evidence, that the new president, Mr. Joko Widodo, or Jokowi as they like to call him, is a good man. His critics in politics are always critics. Always there is rivalry in politics. We know next weekend we have an election in Victoria. Of course, politicians have to say bad things about each other. His critics said that he was not a man of faith, or at least he was not strongly committed. But actually, I've looked at his life, and this is a very humble brother, very sincere, very hardworking, very good record. So that has been my work looking at Indonesia, and I argue that much of the good things that have come in Indonesia, and of course Indonesia has the world's largest Muslim population of one country, and much of the good things that have come in Indonesia, so much so that today Indonesia has the world's, of all Muslim majority nations, the world's largest economy and the strongest growing economy of all Muslim majority nations. So it's really, although it's on the edge of the Muslim world geographically, it's really showing a good example. And I believe that the reason it's made such good progress has been very much because of the contribution of Islamic organizations, social groups, and the way in which they have socialized ideas about peaceful political reform and have maintained stability. Indonesia is a plural society, large Muslim population, 88%, but also Christian, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, and other communities. Recently, the Minister of Religious Affairs announced a reform where he said people will have the right to choose whether they want to acknowledge which religion they represent on their identity card or not, which is a big innovation in Indonesia. And this is a man whose background comes from the largest Islamic group in Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama, which is actually the largest Islamic mass organization in the world, although it only is largely active in Indonesia. And this man, coming from that background, has led this very reformist position. I wrote a biography of Abdurrahman Wahid. I studied him on my PhD 25 years ago, and Abdurrahman Wahid became elected president in October, were elected in July 1999, became president in October 99, and then was a very important reformist transitional president. So I would have very happily focused all of my academic work on these issues, whether in Indonesia or in Turkey or elsewhere, because I find this very satisfying work. I have thankfully made many good friends. Abdurrahman Wahid became a close family friend. Unfortunately, he has passed now, but we're still close with his family, his children. Another great Islamic intellectual, Khalis Majid, very wonderful brother, whose work is not so well known outside Indonesia because of the language barrier, but very, very strong scholar, became a close friend, and there are many others. So that was the beginning of my academic work on Islam. It has led me to many positive encounters and friendships, strong friendships between myself and my family, and many of our closest friends have been significant Islamic leaders or thinkers or community workers. And that continues to this day. I hope in the next few weeks to go back to Indonesia and early in the new year. And I could spend all of my time working on that. But I'm saying this because I also spend a lot of my time working on questions of political movements, partly because that is my work in teaching politics, researching politics, but partly because when I saw the video image of the 9/11 attack back in September 2001, I realized that something very big had happened and that I would have to pay attention to this. Up until that point, my academic preference was to focus my work on looking at significant Islamic intellectuals, looking at the ulama who are leading in developing responses to living in the modern world in a very positive way. And I wasn't interested in looking at those who were arguing for politics and using violence to justify political action. But when I saw those images, which I think all of us recall very clearly, even though all of this time has passed, 13 years, I think it's still very clear in our minds. I realized I had to pay closer attention to understand what was going on, partly because there was no ignoring that this was a part of our modern world that needed to be understood. And I felt if I didn't pay attention to this myself, then I was not in a position to be critical to others who were speaking on these issues if I was not prepared to speak myself or engage myself. And I was always conscious that for a long time there has been a lot of misunderstanding, largely based on ignorance. And when we have a position of ignorance, we tend to fill in the gaps in our knowledge with the product of our imagination, not just our own imagination, but the products of our collective community imagining. So when we don't know something, we don't leave that as a blank space on the map. We draw in the lines on the map based not on knowledge, but on what we hear people saying. And that can lead to a lot of prejudice. And I've been aware that for a long time, you can really say 1,000 years, there has been great misunderstanding between Islam and Christianity, and between Muslims and Christians. And largely this is because of ignorance, because of lack of knowledge. I mean, there have been many exceptions. I mean, if you think of Andalusia, you think of the Ottoman Empire, there was a lot of exchange. In the Western tradition, which we're all part of here living in Australia, in the Western tradition, a lot of the understood historical roots of Western thought come from classical Greek thought. But how did that classical Greek thought come into European and then Western tradition? We sort of might imagine that people went to Greece and found documents from ancient Greece, and that's how it came. The truth is that most of those documents had been lost and destroyed. They were passed into European tradition because they were translated first into Arabic. In places around modern Syria, there were scholars who translated from the Greek into Arabic, who carried on research in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, etc., geometry, and extended that knowledge. And because of the Arabic text that was done by these Muslim scholars, Muslims and Christians, but mostly Muslim scholars, that knowledge came into the Western tradition. So from the beginning of Islam, there has been an encounter with different cultural, civilizational spheres and a very productive meeting of cultural spheres. Of course, I always tell my students, when you think about it, Islam began very much as a faith that was revealed, that came to be understood in the city. And so, of course, Islam began in Mecca, but it flourished in Medina, in the city, before coming back to Mecca. And as it spread to cities. It's always been a cosmopolitan urban religion. And one of the distinctive attributes of cities, as we can see living in this city in Melbourne, is that they are cosmopolitan. They have a mixture of people coming together. They have different religious traditions, different ethnic traditions coming together. And so I tell my students at Monash that from the very beginning, this was a feature of Islamic thought. And of course, when we look at those early centuries, when we look at what happened in Andalusia, in the Iberian Peninsula, Western Europe, later on what happened with the Ottoman Empire, we see a lot of interaction between Islam and Christianity. And yet somehow we came to a position in modernity where in the West and in the so-called Christian sphere, there was a lot of ignorance, a lot of blank spaces on the map. And people tend to fill in those blank spaces with all sorts of imaginings, which is, I think, it's sad, but it can be very, very, very consequential. It can make a big difference to the world that we live in. Just at the moment in Australia, we see this controversy about halal certification. I was very glad last night I was watching the news. I was coming to you late because I was at my parents' place in Aireys Inlet in the west. When I got there late last night, they're watching the news, and I saw a Orthodox rabbi speaking about halal certification. And he was asked about it because of kosher certification, which of course is in many ways requires similar, obviously the standards in many ways are similar, and the philosophical understanding in many ways is similar, but also the cultural context is very similar. And he made the very good point that if we start to become afraid of things like halal certification without any good reason, that is just a veil, it's a platform for bigotry, which leads to all sorts of misunderstanding. And I do believe that the current anxiety about halal certification is largely, it's a product of ignorance, but also a product of a degree of bigotry. And it was good to see this rabbi speaking against that and to see voices speaking up against these things. The reason that these things concern me is I'm always concerned when I see bigotry and misunderstanding. And because of my lifelong work, when I see it coming from so-called Christian society towards Muslims, it particularly concerns me because I can see the pain and harm this causes, but I can also see the damage it causes to our society. We are living in a world at the moment where there are some very powerful political movements that want to take advantage of youthful anger, and they want to inflame the situation. And when there is bigotry and when there is misunderstanding, I mean, we live in a good country here in Australia. We have freedom. Alhamdulillah, it's a good position. And yet, when our young people experience prejudice, racism, bigotry, people speak badly about their faith, of course there's anger. And of course, it makes it easier for those who would recruit them for political causes to engage them. So that's it's a very direct, immediate consequence that affects our national security. It affects our well-being, but it also affects our quality of life. I mean, if every society has these contending elements, nothing is perfect. There's always a mixture of things going on. Every country, every nation, every city, every people has this paradoxical things. So the best things about Australia are tolerance and respect and understanding and accepting of difference. This is a society built on migration. The original population still lives here, but they are small in number because of the large number of migrants that have come. And that has increased through the second half of last century. It's made a very rich, positive society, and it's something that we benefit from, all of us. And there's a general understanding in this country that this is a good thing and needs to be defended. So I'm encouraged in the midst of all the difficult things we see happening around us. We do see political leaders from different parties, both sides of government, speaking up and saying the right things. But sometimes they say things which are not well expressed or can cause misunderstanding just because of the style of communication. But I think in general, the country has some good understandings, but we need to work to overcome misunderstanding. So when I see this problem of halal certification and the anxiety about that, it worries me that people are ignorant. It also worries me that behind that there is some deeper prejudice. So let me speak about my personal position as a Christian to try and explain how I come to this as an academic, because of course in reality, the world that we live in, we present things as being separate, but in reality we are thinkers and people who have many influences in our lives shaping the way we think and the way we understand things. So although I attempt to do my academic work objectively, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm shaped by my own faith background. And also as a Christian, I come from a Protestant Christian background from a Presbyterian church. I'm conscious of the fact that my Christian faith shapes everything in my life. It shapes my approach to understanding politics, to understanding society, to the sense of obligation that and motivation for my work. One thing that of the many things that we share in common as Christians and Muslims is an understanding that, and not every religion has this understanding in the same way, but we share this common understanding that we live one life. That life is short. It passes very quickly. The other week I turned 52 and I was reminded how quickly the years pass. I feel like I'm ready to turn 30, but actually I've already turned 52 now. Time races by so very quickly, and I'm conscious of the fact I have just this one life. And then I have to give an account for my life before my Creator, before God. There is a day of judgment for all of us, individually and collectively, and I will have to give account to my Creator and explain what I've done with my life. And if all I can say to my Creator is I published so many articles or so many books or taught so many students or did so many things, I don't believe that will of itself impress him, or that I don't believe he's going to say, well done, that's a good life, just because you've done those things. I mean, everyone has to work hard, earn money, feed their family. That's necessary. But we have this desire to do something more with our life beyond just earning a wage and taking it home and looking after our family. Those are important things. So as an academic, I do believe that my opportunity and my responsibility is to contribute to understanding, the growth of knowledge, and particularly in our country and around the world, in particular between Muslims and Christians. So my approach to understanding Islam, everything I've experienced from those interactions in Indonesia or Turkey or elsewhere. The other week I was in Abu Dhabi. Next fortnight I will go again. I always enjoy a chance to be in a different community and to experience, make different friendships. And through many, many friendships with Muslims, including many great ulama, I've come to a personal understanding that we share many common concerns, many common values, many common outlooks. And I'm also conscious of the fact that there are many Christians, including many people who ostensibly come from the same background that I come from, who don't share my position, who would argue that there are these deep differences. Well, there are differences. Of course there are differences. If there were not differences, then we wouldn't use different names and have different traditions and different habits. The differences are there. But I don't believe the differences are as divisive or such a barrier between us as some would say. And so my personal understanding as an individual and as a scholar is that we are concerned with largely the same values. We are concerned with how to please God. And I do believe we share a common understanding, some differences of understanding, but a common understanding about many things in this regard. I believe that one of the great duties of our life is to try and be as good a person as our Creator made us to be. So the idea of insan kamil, of being as close to being a perfect human being as possible, I think is a really wonderful and very important concept in the Jewish tradition. From the German, from the Yiddish, they have a word mensch, which is a cognate with the word man, men, human being, both genders, which means a good person, not just a good person, but a really good person, a person who lives up to being what a human being should be. And that tradition is there in Christianity as well. And I believe when I look at my friends, my Muslim brothers and sisters, it guides them as well. So and perhaps it's helpful to communicate this point of understanding, because it's a point of which we can meet and discuss and have some understanding. Who do I look to understand what it means to be, as best I can, become insan kamil, to become a good person, to become a mensch? What is my guide? What is my template? Well, I believe that God has revealed himself through the prophets, and he's revealed so many things about him that I wouldn't understand were it not for that revelation. So that revelation can guide me, of course. And we share many common understandings here on the Mazmur, on the writings of Nabi Musa. Christians and Muslims have some different understandings about the Injil, but I still believe there are some deep common themes that we share in common. But as human beings, we need somebody to look up to directly. I mean, parents are very important for their children. Husbands and wives are very important for each other. Brothers and sisters are very important for each other. Friends are very important, because we look at individuals and we see, for better or worse, an expression of an understanding of how one approaches and serves God. So some young people can be led astray by those who claim to be acting in the name of God, but giving a bad example. This is a human failing. I mean, it's a deep, deep human failing that is universal everywhere across this planet. As human beings, we have a tendency to be self-righteous and to think of ourselves as being able to speak in God's name, which we have to do, but we have to do with great caution and respect. And I think it's a great responsibility. But we look to human beings to give us spiritual guidance and practical moral guidance, and to be our compass. We look to family, friends, our teachers, our role models. So this is very important. For Christians, we look specifically to the person of Jesus, or if you like, Nabi Isa, in terms of character, in terms of example, so there's a template to look at and to understand. Now, as soon as we talk about Christians and Muslims, and we talk about Jesus or Nabi Isa, people immediately go off and talk about all sorts of differences. And there are important different understandings. But I think that when we are so quick to talk about differences, we often forget some things we have in common. What I understand from my studies and from my friendships of Islam is that the great role model, the great personal moral compass, the great example for Muslims in terms of how to live in a very practical sense is Nabi Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who has modeled in his life an example of humility and generosity, of patience and compassion, of greatness of spirit, and represents, I think, all of the good things that we aspire to be as human beings. And although on another occasion I'm happy to talk about differences in understandings of Jesus and his mission or Prophet Muhammad, when it comes to the question of moral character and moral example, I do believe we are looking at very similar expressions, which of course makes sense, that God, through his prophets, revealed himself in a way which is consistent. So the things which my Muslim friends so admire in the Prophet Muhammad as an example of how to live, not just in society, but also in the family and personal relations, those are the same things, I believe, as Christians that we speak of understanding. So this notion of somebody who lives a selfless life living for others, somebody who lives a life moved constantly by compassion and love and concern, somebody who, in the face of irritation, people provoking him to anger, is patient and does not return irritation and provocation with anger, but returns irritation and provocation, even violence against him, even slander, with grace and compassion and forgiveness. Somebody who forgives their enemies, somebody who is not quick to anger, somebody who is quick to forgive, somebody who is constantly thinking of others and trying to be a blessing and a service to them. And this is something that we all aspire to. This is something we must aspire to. This is the example that we live for. And I do believe on this foundation that as Christians and Muslims, we have so much in common. We shouldn't be distracted by differences of opinions we have about many things. This is true across life. There will always be differences of opinions. I don't know which football team you support. Our daughter was born in Geelong Hospital, and we lived for many years in Geelong, and so became fans of Geelong Cats, right? Can I tell you that the Geelong football team is better than other football teams? No, of course. I mean, I like it. Our family likes it. We like to watch them play. We think that they play cleanly and they show a good moral example. I feel happy when they win. I feel sad when they lose. But it's my football team. And if you support Hawthorn, or maybe even Collingwood, or Essendon, or some other team, Richmond, I can't tell you that's bad at all. And it's normal and healthy. We wouldn't even have, in this field of this simple example of sports, we'd have no such thing as a football premiership competition if we didn't have different teams. How can we play sport if we don't have different teams? We can't even, it doesn't make sense if you only have one team. The same thing for soccer, for cricket. Maybe there are many cricket fans here more than football fans, I don't know. The same thing. I mean, it's part of it's one of the blessings in life we have. My point of this illustration is there are things that we have differences on that shouldn't divide us. That's a small, trivial example. Next Saturday, many of us will vote. Do I choose the Labor Party or the Liberal Party? Or both of them don't look very promising to me for different reasons. But I won't tell you how to vote. That's a matter of personal decision. There's no black and white answers here on this matter. I mentioned our daughter. She was born in Geelong Hospital. She grew up as a Cats fan. Why did she grow up supporting Geelong football team? Well, because she was born into a family that supported Geelong football team, and that is her position. When it comes to her religious faith, she has a very strong Christian faith. How did that start? It started because of the family she was born in, and then it became a personal thing. But that is the pattern of humanity. 2/3 of us living on this planet identify directly or indirectly, strongly or maybe not so strongly, with either Christianity or Islam. 2/3 of the planet, more or less. It has been that way for many, many centuries. It will be that way for many more centuries to come. It's really important we find a way of respecting each other and living in peace constructively. I don't believe we can do this without knowledge and without understanding and without respect. People use the word tolerance, but tolerance sounds kind of like a weak term. I think we need more than tolerance. We need respect, mutual respect. But fortunately, mutual respect comes easily when you have friendships. And because I've been blessed with many Muslim friends, including some great teachers, it's become easy for me to have this respect. But I understand that for many others, they haven't had that experience. I think, returning to this point about the moral foundation, if we understand that we share a common concern about how to become, as best as we can, insan kamil, to be perfect human beings. Not perfect, we're not going to be perfect, but as best by God's grace as we can, inshallah, to become as good a people as we can, men and women. That we actually, as Muslims and Christians, do share a common vision of the qualities that have been revealed to us, whether we have this particular close identification with Prophet Muhammad or with Jesus. That difference is largely a question of where we're born, which family we were born into. This is from the hand of God. It's the providence of God, right? He directs the world. He directs our paths as nations, as peoples, as individuals. And we're told that if he wanted the world all to be one, he would have made it so, but he made the world to be diverse. I believe he made us diverse and expects us, hopes for us, that we would respect each other. But we do have this common foundation. So coming to my last and third point about this study of questions of groups like Daesh, Islamic State, how do we understand what's happening in this world today? Well, let me tell you my personal position, both as an individual, as a believer, but also as an academic. I believe what we're witnessing at the moment in a world full of much suffering and pain and hurt is a lot of young people moved to try and do something to make a difference. But if they're given good guidance, then that can be a constructive contribution they make. But if they make friends who give them bad counsel, bad guidance, they can quickly end up in a bad place. All of us as human beings, the way we behave, particularly when we're very young, more so men than women, but men and women the same, particularly teenagers and when we're in our 20s, we always remain foolish through our lives, but we become steadily a bit wiser. But when we're young, we long for a sense of belonging. We long for a sense of people saying, you're my brother, you are respected. Our self-esteem is fragile. We want somebody to make us feel comfortable about who we are, not as an individual alone, but also as a member of a group. And so our friends can be very influential. If our friends have bad habits, they're into abusing drugs and alcohol, maybe involved in criminal activity, a good young person can end up doing something bad because of this bad model of friends. And it doesn't start, I believe, with them wanting to be bad. It starts with them following their friends. And then the friends become something which can lead them astray. And I do believe that when young people have gone from suburbs of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and ended up fighting with violent groups, it's not because they wanted to be bad people. I believe that, I don't know the individual stories of every person, of course, but I believe as a general pattern, people are moved by their friendships, by their peer association, their networks of peers, and young people are very idealistic. They want to live in a world that fights for good, fights to overcome evil, fights to overcome injustice. They want to build a better world. And if a new friend tells them this is the way to build a better world, it's a very powerful message. It grips them very, very powerfully. Now, 5 years ago, if somebody is telling young people, you must follow this political group and this is the way to change the world, overcome injustice, the chances are that they might become active in that group for a while. They might put all their energies into it, but they're unlikely to come into harm's way because, young people go through phases of political activism and association. Then they get older and they weigh things up and they balance their opinion and they shift their position. At the moment, I believe, and I'm speaking in my personal view on this and I'm happy to answer questions, I believe we live in a time of danger because there is much injustice in the world. There are many things that break our heart. We look at what's happening in Syria and it moves us. It's truly horrible. 200,000 lives plus lost. Half of the country, people forced to live outside their homes. Many women and children mistreated, abused. There's many things that fill us with great sadness. But one of the dangers we face at the moment is looking at this world of great sadness and great trouble. There are political groups that would come and say, you have to join us and you have to go and travel. You have to be in Syria, you have to be in Iraq, you have to fight with us. This is the way to overcome the injustice. And at one level, I can understand initially concerns to be part of the reform movements in the Middle East, seeing what happens in Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, what happens in Syria, Iraq, wanting to overcome the injustice. I believe a great damage was done to Iraq after 2003, after the invasion. A great harm was done, many lives were lost. I think it was many tragic mistakes were made. And I can understand the sense of anger and desire to do something. I can understand people's fear of persecution. But I do believe, well, my point that I'm coming to is that this group that calls itself Islamic State, I do believe the Prime Minister on this point, and he doesn't always express himself very well, I think, but on this point I believe he's correct. This is not Islamic and it's not a state. And yet it has control over territory. 8 million people live in northern Syria, northern Iraq under the control of this movement. And it uses the name of Islam. It recruits as a religious group, even though we are critical of it. And we have to, encounter that reality. Islamic State boasts that it has 100,000 people who have sworn bayat to Caliph Ibrahim, as they claim. But there are 8 million people living under their control. And from 8 million people, if only 100,000 swear bayat, to me that suggests that there's a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with their occupation. I was opposed to the American Allied occupation in 2003 onwards. I think the current occupation by the group that calls itself Islamic State is wrong in principle. But my particular criticism is the use of violence in a way that I believe cannot be justified, and the way it draws our young people in and falsely says this is the path to make a difference, to make a better world. I believe it is a great danger for all of us. You can understand, as I explain my background, that I'm really concerned that in a world that has a lot of prejudice towards Islam and Muslims, that what this group is doing further makes things worse. Because people come home at night and what do they see on their TV news? What do they understand about Islam, we know all the teaching of Islam, but what do they hear on the news? Just about some political group doing horrible things. And it feeds that anxiety and that prejudice. It compounds that sense of misunderstanding. So when we have last week this news of people campaigning against halal certification without any evidence that the things they claim that money is being misused, without any evidence for such things, I believe it speaks to a deeper prejudice, a deeper fear, and it's a particular challenge we face at this point in history. So this is my personal position. I thank God that I have been blessed, myself and my family, over more than a quarter of a century now, studying Islamic thinkers and movements, and particularly in Indonesia and Turkey and beyond, having many good friends, leading to me to a very positive understanding. But I can see the world, particularly our country, has many misunderstandings. At the same time, I do spend a lot of my time academically studying these violent political movements to try and understand what they're doing, what their message is, and what we can do in response. And I wish it were otherwise. I wish I could just focus on these questions of reform and peaceful contributions. But this is the world we live in, so that's why we're talking about these issues. Thankfully, I believe that we're talking about a very small number of actors who make a very loud noise to present themselves as being somehow the voice of a majority, when they're really a voice of a very small minority. People say to me, well, what about Muslims in Australia? I say there's 500,000 Australians who identify with Islam. And imagine if there's a few hundred people who are attracted to this group, then maybe it would be 1/10 of 1%, 1 in 1,000. So let's not judge a community on the basis of 1 in 1,000. Every community has its problems, but this challenge is with us, and it's going to be with us for a long time to come. So I think that's more than enough of me speaking of my personal background and perception. But I hope that is helpful, inshallah, that it makes some contribution to a basis for discussion. I believe that what we're doing tonight and what we'll be doing in the years to come is very important, because it's only through dialogue and through discussion and working together that we can overcome these challenges that are being presented to us by very small numbers of, whether it's Christians with prejudice, whether it's Muslims with prejudiced ideas, whatever name they use for themselves, but a small number of people who are causing trouble for us, majority. We have to be intelligent. We have to look to our teachers. We have to work together to try and overcome this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Greg Barton.